Welcome to Voice It. This is a podcast showcasing people in the Clare Valley and the mid-north of South Australia who've started their own businesses from scratch and have turned them into success stories. I'm your host, Annabelle Homer.
I think it must have been, day 2 of induction week at Roseworthy. We were on a bus and travelling somewhere for a tour and a tasting, and someone was talking about Shiraz. And I remember turning around and saying to somebody, what's Shiraz? And here I am intending to make a career out of this. So I really started on the back foot. There's no doubt about that.
Let's just say she's not on the back foot anymore. In fact, she's now known as Australia's Riesling Queen. Meet Kerri Thompson. She's been making wine in South Australia's Clare Valley for more than 20 years, founding her winery Wines by KT in 2006. Kerri, or as most of us call her, KT, grew up by the beach at Glenelg, but spent a lot of her time in the mid-north at her grandmother's farm at Black Springs near Robertstown. So this beach-loving girl always had some affinity with the land, which could partly explain why she went down the winemaking path. But it wasn't planned. You could say she was flying blind. But the one thing that she did want to do was get to Italy, and working in the wine industry was going to get her there. KT's story starts at the Roseworthy Agricultural College as a young 17-year-old girl about to embark on a career in a male-dominated industry. It wasn't easy being the youngest in her year, or a female for that matter, but despite sailing through some rough seas, KT has come out the other end as one of the country's top Riesling makers, making wines that express spirit of place and enjoyment. This is KT's story.
It really was completely out of left field for me, for my family. And, I left high school, straight from high school, to go out to Roseworthy Agricultural College to study winemaking at the age of 17.
Why Roseworthy?
And it was funny because I enjoyed science at school. I was pretty good at chemistry, but I also had these two sides. So I studied art and chemistry at high school, which is really, obviously not normal. And I just really was unsure about which direction I wanted to take. But somebody at the high school, like a careers counsellor, had said to me, you should go and check out Roseworthy Agricultural College because they have science courses with a bit of a twist. And because I knew that I wanted to travel, I knew that I wanted to, I was also studying language, Italian, and I knew that I wanted to somehow end up working over there and so...
In Italy?
Yeah, and so it gave me an opportunity to sort of celebrate all of those avenues. And so I went out to the agricultural campus and it just sounded so fantastic. And to be able to sort of still focus on some science but not be stuck in a laboratory all of the time. And honestly, had I known what I was getting myself in for, there's absolutely no way that I would have continued, I don't think.
Oh, really? Why?
I found it really difficult. I was a fish out of water. I was 17. The university had to help me get a fake ID to be able to go to all of the tastings at the age of 17. It was ridiculous.
Should we be revealing that?
Probably not, and it probably wouldn't happen these days.
Wow.
So that was.
So were you one of the youngest students?
I was.
Okay,
yeah.
Right.
So that was in the early 90s, and I was one of 6 females out of a group of 35, something of that nature. And so, I'd come from a really nurturing, very close friendship base and close family to being completely thrown in the deep end out at uni. And to be honest, I I found it really difficult. And
so what kept you going then?
I wasn't a particularly good student, I have to say.
In regards to what? Partying?
Pretty well.
Isn't that a rite of passage though? When you go to uni?
Well, of course, yeah. And so I moved in with my grandparents for 12 months and I didn't have a licence. So I was learning how to drive. So not just the sort of, the university work, it was also just a lot of those sort of growing up things as well at the same time. So it was an interesting time for sure. But I suppose being a really driven and quite competitive person, I just, wasn't going to accept anything other than making it work. In the end, I suppose I put my head down enough to get through.
When did you taste your first glass of wine? And did you actually like it?
Well, I remember I think it must have been, day 2 of induction week at Roseworthy. We were on a bus and travelling somewhere for a tour and a tasting and someone was talking about Shiraz. And I remember turning around and saying to somebody, what's Shiraz? And here I am intending to make a career out of this. So I really started on the back foot. There's no doubt about that.
Do you think that's a benefit though? Having a clean slate like that?
Absolutely.
Starting from scratch?
Yeah, most definitely. And so I was just a sponge, but I'm sort of the person that absolutely learns from being hands-on and tactile. And so it wasn't really until I was out and about in industry and actually being given an opportunity to get into things and learning from doing that things just started to really sort of click and actually enjoying the process of having a physical vocation, I suppose. So it was sink or swim, essentially.
So when you finished your degree, what was the first job? Where did you go?
Well, we had to complete a vintage as part of the university training. And so being at that point, I was only 18 years old, still, very few females in the industry at that time. And so I found it really difficult to get work experience. And so this was for a work experience. It was part of the course. And I just went from interview to interview to interview, and it just was becoming really quite depressing and it's that vicious cycle. Unless you have experience, you don't really get an opportunity, but to get the experience, you need the opportunity. So I was really fortunate that I received a letter from Stephen John, who at the time was managing Cortala Wines, but back in those days it was called Eaglehawk. He and Tim Adams were working there, and so my first ever vintage was at Eaglehawk Wines, which is now Cortala. They very kindly gave me a vintage position working in the laboratory. It was a wonderful experience because often the laboratory is the real hub of vintage. So all of the communication often comes through there, all of the samples, you get to see a really broad range of what's going on. And so it was a fabulous experience, and I'm forever grateful to those guys for actually seeing something in me that was going to give me that initial opportunity. After that I finished my degree and then was out looking for work, and that was in obviously the early 90s, and the Australian wine community was sort of just starting to gain a lot more momentum. International markets were opening up, and so there were positions becoming available, and so I really fortunately was given a vintage role at Wirrawirra Vineyards down in McLaren Vale. That was a family-owned operation, large enough to give you a really broad experience, but still small enough for us to be able to sit around a table at lunchtime all together and taste some wines and, eat some great food and talk. I thought everyone worked like that. We talked about art, we talked about politics, we talked about, all of this sort of stuff. And it was an amazing first step into the wine community.
What was your job there?
So I was employed as a cellar hand. And the good thing about that was that you were involved in everything. You know, I learnt all of the equipment, all of the machinery. You weren't just sort of put on one job. So that was really the start, and that was the opportunity, you know, being tactile, learning whilst doing and all of that. I just absolutely loved it. And it was at that point that I was like, wow, this is
what I want to do.
Lots of fun.
Yeah, yep.
Bloody hard work. You know, we worked long hours. And
how long were you there for?
Well, I was there on and off for 5 vintages. They were wonderful because they allowed me an opportunity to travel internationally and work internationally, and every now and then I'd get a phone call and say, right, it's time to come home.
Well, so you started to travel overseas, do vintages overseas. So where did you do those?
Well, it got me to Italy. So I worked in Chianti at an amazing producer called Isolea Elena with an amazing winemaker called Paolo De Marchi, who I still remain in contact with nowadays, which is a really beautiful thing. And so that was in my first vintage there was in 1995. And
how old were you at this point?
Well,
21?
Yeah, I was.
Oh,
I was 21.
What a baptism of fire, though.
Was.
That's you're still quite young, and you're doing a vintage overseas. That's amazing.
It was amazing. It was that experience. I remember the moment, you know, I was sitting out in the vineyard with Paolo and the vineyard manager. We sat down, we were sitting on the earth, and we were sort of feeling the rocks, and you know, they were explaining to me about what it is that makes Italian wine. And, you know, I'll never forget that moment, because it was really at that point that things just all of a sudden made sense to me. And that was really the moment that I was like so inspired. My God, this is what I'm going to do forevermore.
How did you even get in contact with this winemaker?
Yeah, well, so, I mean, you got to remember that this was all before mobile phones. And, I mean, I still remember the first mobile phone that I ever saw that was the size of a brick, and it was like the Ben Riggs, who was the winemaker at the time, who I worked with. You know, he was like super excited about it, and it was just like, oh my God, look how far we've come. And, so, you know, there were a series of faxes. I was communicating with Italy via fax, and
so was it through a connection from Wira?
Yeah, it was.
Okay.
Yeah, and so at Wira we used to make wines for a number of different people. One of which at the time was Shaw and Smith, and so we used to produce their Sauvignon Blanc back in the day. God, how far the life has come. Martin Shaw, who is a lovely fellow, and he used to come in and taste the wines, and we'd get chatting, and I had said to him how I really desperately wanted to get to Italy and work in Italy, and he was like, "Oh, I've got a contact that I might be able to hook you up with," and so it went from there.
Wow! And
I had no understanding of who this person was or what this place was, and it was only after some communication that I remember reading a magazine. A wine magazine, and there was a photo of Paolo and talking about how things were starting to take off for them in the US, and as it transpired, this guy was pretty famous, and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to actually work for like a really awesome place. Yeah, pressure. And I remember arriving off the bus obviously flew to Florence, but caught a bus from Florence down to
backpack on.
Totally, absolutely. And I got off the bus, and Paolo met me at the bus, and he's like, "Gee, you know, you're Australian, and you guys are making some pretty good Chardonnay," which is pretty hilarious thinking about the early 90s. And he was like, "Well, you've got to make the Chardonnay for us this year." And I mean, like,
had you ever made Chardonnay?
Well, I'd been a part of a couple of vintages of Chardonnay, but I mean, I had no idea what I was doing. And of course, you know, again, getting back to that whole, well, this is my opportunity, I'm going to take it and run with it. It's sink or swim, let's go for it. I'm competitive. I was just like, sure, I can do that for you. just like, oh my God. So, yeah, and it's so funny because
I would be absolutely scared out of my mind.
Well, yeah, and of course I was, but it's sort of like those, every now and then moments come into your life that you have to take them because you just don't know if they're going to ever come your way again. And
that was the moment.
And that was one of the moments, yeah. And it's so funny. I saw Paolo a few years ago and he said to me, KT, that Chardonnay that you made in 1995 is one of the best Chardonnays we've ever had. And I was like, oh my God. I'm sure you're just saying that. But, it's like it's sort of, it was definitely one of those crossroad moments where, it's make or break.
So let's go to the next stage in your life. When did you realise, okay, I love this. I'm going to make it my own. I'm going to develop my own winery, my own brand, and my signature will be Riesling. When did that all?
Well, that came a little while later, but I suppose that moment in Italy really taught me to look at wine very differently. So at the time in Australia, wine was very much about a flavour bomb and it was sort of a bigger fruit expression and that was really putting Australian wine on the map, which was fantastic. But, to be able to look at wine from a more structural and textural element and think about the shape of a wine as opposed to, just the flavour was a really important part of my winemaking style and evolving my winemaking style, and that really happened working internationally. So when I returned, I interviewed for a position as the white winemaker at Leasingham Wines for the Hardy Wine Company and was fortunate enough to get that role. So that brought me back to Clare. And so that was back in 98. And so I've been living and working and making wine in Clare ever since then.
You've been here a fair while.
Yeah, so 22 odd years. It wasn't long after I took that position that the manager of the site left, and so there was another one of these crossroad opportunity moments. So at the age of 24, I've taken a position as a white winemaker, and then all of a sudden I have the opportunity to take on the management of a 6,000-tonne winery. And, of course, I say yes. Because
another one of those moments.
Another one of those moments. Yeah. And
you obviously are very good at what you do, though, because you wouldn't be offered these moments or given these moments.
Thank you for saying that. But you get to a point where it's like, well, this will mean working hard and learning a lot of new stuff, and I suppose I'm the kind of person that never lets those things sit idle. I'm going to take it on. Yeah, so I took that position and I was with the Hardy Wine Company for 8 years, and the corporate world taught me a lot of new experiences and a lot of different sides to winemaking and a lot of business, running to budgets and all of that sort of management stuff, which was a fabulous opportunity. It took me around the world. I travelled a lot with wine around the world, which is, again, one of the things that I always wanted to sort of get involved in.
Do you think corporate wine has that reputation of not being as high quality?
Well, I think it's unfortunate that sometimes that is the case, but it's not necessarily true. And I have to really, I suppose, defend, certainly from my perspective and what we were involved in. We had a lot of smaller parcels that were really nurtured and cared for, and quality levels from, all aspects, right from the top tier all the way down. And everything that we did was very much about focusing on making sure that at all of those tiers it was the best that it could possibly be. The experience that I had there really taught me how to look after, I suppose, wine qualities at different levels. Having worked in sites of various different sizes, I have to say the discipline that we had within that big company framework was so significant that, I've taken that through to my work now. So without that discipline, I certainly wouldn't be able to achieve what I am now, I don't think.
When did you decide to leave Hardy's and then go out on your own?
Yeah. So I suppose after 8 years of corporate, and as so often happens, you end up more in management, you end up more behind a computer and spreadsheets and all that sort of thing. And I just wasn't, it's not for me. You know, I'm pretty rubbish at all that sort of stuff. So I was really desperate to get back to being hands-on, and I had a phone call from a grower that is now a really important wine growing source for my business. So Bunny Peglitis rang and said, look, I've not got a home for my fruit for next vintage. Do you happen to know of anybody who might be interested in taking my fruit? And I was like, don't ring anyone else. I'm going to take it. And that was really the catalyst so I resigned not long after and started my own business.
And why Riesling?
I suppose in my past at Wirra and internationally, most of my experience had been red wine production. So when I started at Leasingham, and the first vintage I ever made for Leasingham was rubbish, was horrible. And I think it got the lowest score in the Clare wine show. And
gee, that wouldn't have been great for your confidence.
No, absolutely not. And I remember going, oh, wow, you know, this is, again, one of those moments. This is like horrific. I've got to make some changes. And so I've just flipped it. So the next year it was like all resources onto the Riesling. We're going to try and do the very best we can. And so I did a whole heap of chatting to other winemakers and tasting other wines and really trying to, I suppose, just, you know, review my focus. And then the next year we won the best Riesling and won the McNapstein Trophy at the Clare Wine Show for the 2000 vintage Bin 7 Riesling.
Oh, wow.
So it was sort of like, you know, from the worst to the best. You know, it was a great wake-up call. It was one of those moments that, again, makes you go, well, you know, with some extra, I suppose, focus and research and doing the extra work, that essentially changed my path. So I really fell in love with Riesling and sort of made it, you know, that sort of life work. Well, I'm going to show people how beautiful Riesling can be, and really since then have sort of made an effort to communicate to people that Riesling can be many different shapes and sizes, and, you know, really show the beauty of the diversity of the grape variety.
When did KT Wines, when was it first established? What year was that?
2006.
2006.
And so I had started making some Riesling for my own business back in 2004, and then had resigned from Leasingham in 2006, and my first official vintage for Wines by KT was 2007.
So when did you feel you really had the numbers on the board and you really had hit your stride with your own business? How long did it take?
I think it's still happening. I'm not sure.
I don't know about that.
I'm not really too sure that we're there yet. I suppose... Yeah, look, it's a hard question to answer because the goalposts are always sort of changing. You know, every year I come up with sort of bigger and better things to do. Each year there's something new in the business. And so, you know, it's constantly evolving and growing and
but you've got to sell a door. You've got obviously a ready supply of grapes.
Absolutely.
Or supportive growers.
Yeah,
so that's all
right.
established.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, it certainly has taken a number of years to achieve that. A lot of support from a lot of really great people. It's Wines by KT, but there's no way it's just a one-person operation. You know, I have staff. I have some staff now. I also have a really supportive family and network of people around me that have helped create this business too.
How many growers?
Well, I have historically only been working with 2 growers, but the last few years things have changed a little in that the business has grown, and so to improve the supply I've had to sort of look a little bit further afield. So I'm now working with about 10 different growers, all Clare Valley, mainly from around the Watervale area, but certainly a little bit further afield around the valley now. And most of these vineyards are older vines, Most of them are dry grown. A lot of the families have been farming for many decades, and so I'm really lucky to be working with some really beautiful people, and that's, for me, a big part of the story too, you know, finding people that you're looking at life from a similar direction and, you know, wanting to, because a lot of the focus is about making sure that it's sustainable farming and really caring for the special patch of dirt that they're on.
So you set up the business back in 2006.
Yeah.
Since then, what has been the most challenging year?
2011 was a really difficult vintage because it just didn't stop raining. And there was a lot of disease pressure, a lot of botrytised grapes that were sort of not able to be used. And so, you know, that tested a lot of people. It certainly tested my winemaking skills because I had never experienced anything like it. It had tested a lot of growers as well because they too had never seen anything like it. And so it was a very expensive year because we only picked about 1/3 of the fruit that was out on the vine. And then, of course, the stigma attached to that particular vintage out in the marketplace. So a lot of people then didn't buy them, which was a real shame because some of the wines that were bottled were absolutely delicious. And because it was a cool year, we had some really fabulous natural acid. And so these wines are actually cellaring really beautifully. So that was a really tough season for us as a wine community to work through.
So a third of the grapes were picked. So how does that translate into how many bottles of wine were produced out of that vintage?
Well, look, for me, I didn't release any red wine under my label from that particular vintage because I just kept going back to them and saying, oh, look, they're just not where my market would want them. You know, that's a significant loss to skip. But even though I've bought all of the grapes, I've made all of the wine, but haven't released them. So it was a really expensive year. So that took a couple of years really for us to work through, and it wasn't just me. It was all of the wine businesses out in the community. The sort of flow-on effects to the community have been significant, and really it took a number of years to work through that. I suppose from a business perspective, certainly last year was, you know, with the advent of COVID, and for someone who's built a business on selling to bars and restaurants, particularly on the East Coast, all of a sudden most of my market was closed. You know, we really had to shift our thinking pretty quickly last year, and so to online, which then of course highlighted a number of inefficiencies in my website, and so that's now all recently been upgraded. We had to be pretty quick on our feet last year. What has been lovely is that my wine community, my mailing list clientele have been fabulously supportive, have continued to buy wine online. Regional tourism then really stepped up last year, and so Cellar Door has been really busy. And so we started opening Cellar Door more often. And
has that made up for the losses interstate?
It certainly has, I suppose, brought a whole new side to my business. And again, highlighting some areas that I've needed to improve, you know, that haven't necessarily been a focus in the past. So out of the difficult years, there have been some really significant learnings. And so I feel like we're now in quite a strong position sort of to take the next step. And that's been, you know, a period of growth as well. We've come off a string of some smaller harvests with seasonal conditions being as dry as they've been. But this year has been an improvement on that. And so we've got some really delicious wines to take to the market. So I'm really excited about the next couple of years.
How's China's tariffs on Australian wine imports affected your business?
Well, I have generally been 100% selling domestically. I have not been a part of that international export market.
But all those wines that were meant to be going overseas now coming back into the domestic
market.
That's
exactly right. And so how it has affected me is, of course, the increased competition within the domestic market. So all of that wine's got to be sold somewhere. So now we are seeing a lot of that wine being brought back to Australia. I mean, a lot of that wine it's in a different price point to the category that I'm working in. And also a lot of the feedback that I've had from out in the trade is that, well, you know, we know, KT, you've been supporting us and here for the last decade, so we're obviously going to continue to support you as opposed to someone who we haven't seen in years and years and years.
Because I think these tariffs are going to continue for the next 5 years.
Yeah.
So do you think that there's going to be some wine businesses that will fall over because of this?
I think absolutely. Yeah, without a doubt. There's going to be some significant changes.
Amongst all this craziness of wine life, you've had a little girl.
Yes.
The process, little Willa.
Yes.
What does she think of Mum and her thriving business? And does she want to take over the reins eventually?
No, she absolutely does not. She sees Mum working pretty hard. I want her to be able to know that it is possible for a young girl to achieve whatever she wants to achieve, to set her mind to. And to not be afraid of hard work. My mum was a really hard worker, and she still is.
What does she do? What did she do?
Well, Mum's worked in retail all of her life, and she's retired now, but she most recently worked running an Australia Post counter, I suppose. You know, Mum's always worked, so she really instilled in me a hard-working ethic, and I'd like to think that I'm influencing Willa in that way too. I'm pretty sure Willa's not keen on making wine. She sees how hard Mum works, and at this age she's not really interested. But
she is 6.
Yeah, that's right. And I do hope that one day she will know that if she wakes up one day that and says that she wants to fly to the moon, that she's got a mum that will support her and whatever her dream might be, and that she won't be afraid of the hard work that is associated with getting to those dreams, and that, you know, she can remember when those moments come past her, that she can, you know, seize them and take them and roll with it.
I think Willa is in good hands with a mum like Kerri. Can't wait to see her on the moon. Kerri Thompson, Australia's Riesling Queen. What a title, and so well deserved too. I love Kerri's mantra, seize the moment, don't let those moments pass you by as you may never get those moments again. So true in her case, and with all of us in fact. If you're passing through Auburn, drop by her gorgeous cellar door on the main drag and get your palate prepped for some delicious wines by KT. You won't be disappointed. I hope you're enjoying this podcast. Please follow and share with your friends, and please rate and review. It'll make my day. While I'm here, I thought I'd just let you know what Voice It is all about. It's my little business. I'm a voice coach offering public speaking sessions for adults, corporates and teenagers who want to up their speaking game. I MC the odd event, and I run a small drama hub for primary-aged children. I'm originally an ABC broadcast journalist with 12 years experience. I love capturing people's stories, which is why this podcast has come to life. To find out more about Voice It, head to my website, voiceit.me. Keep listening, and thank you for your support.